When we're thinking about possibilities for a life after death, when we're thinking about the possibility of a horizon for a continuing existence after the death of the body, of course, we can think about it in different ways, or we can base our beliefs on different principles. One, of course, is an outlook of faith. That is, I think, as we'll see in Paul Landsberg, that there is something miraculous in the outlook of the Christian. Maybe not particularly in Landsberg, but the Christian, I think, believes that eternal life is a gift from God, a miraculous gift from God. In a certain sense, the Christian doesn't need to make an afterlife rational, in the sense that it doesn't have to rest on either any sort of evidence or any sort of rational argument. Let's take something like the doctrine of the resurrection. My understanding is that the human being really, in this view, becomes nothing and then is miraculously brought back into existence by God in an act of love. That's a very different thing from stating or some sort of argument resting on either evidence or logic for the idea of an afterlife or a continued existence of the human being in some manner, which is what Plato is doing. That is, Plato is not a religious thinker. He is a philosophical thinker. And so he has to present his claim. Socrates must present his claim for his faith or his confidence in having some sort of continued existence after this day is done on some sort of rational grounds rather than some expression of faith. And Simmias's argument about the liar has challenged that very much, and it has focused the problem, I think, in a very useful way on the relationship between body and soul. Remember, it's very, very important to remember that Socrates begins his discussion of death with an agreement that death is the separation of soul and body. There's all sorts of complications with that maybe we don't have time to get into. But the whole problem then is to be able to establish that the soul can exist without body. And that is what Simmias has challenged with his idea of the soul as harmony. He has suggested that the soul is in a dependent relationship with body, and that, like the music made by the lyre, it is different from the lyre itself, but it requires that physical thing in order to be. The suggestion is that the soul is in the same sort of dependent relationship with the physicality of the body. That the soul, being different from body, certainly, and we can think of soul as consciousness or intellect or subjectivity, different from body but dependent on body, and so that's a very it's a very formidable point. And Socrates takes some pains to address it. I want to just focus on something here. This is pages 46, 47, where he suggests reasons for thinking that is wrong, that the soul is not utterly dependent on body. That the suggestion by Simmias is that soul is an effect of body. That is, that soul is a phenomenon or an epiphenomenon, a result of body, and has no independent existence of itself. And one of the things he points out is very interesting, and that is that it does seem that in our ordinary experience that soul or consciousness has the ability to act independently of body. For instance, here at the bottom of page 46, he says, "Well, said he," and that's Socrates, "of all the parts of a man, should you not say that it was the soul, and particularly the wise soul, which rules? I should. Does she, the soul, yield to the passions of the body, or does she oppose them? I mean this, when the body is hot and thirsty, does not the soul drag it away and prevent it from drinking? And when it is hungry, up here, does she not prevent it from eating? And do we not see her opposing the passions of the body in 1,000 other ways? Yes, certainly. But we have also agreed that if she is a harmony, she can never give a sound contrary to the tensions and relaxations and vibrations and other changes of the elements of which she is composed, that she must follow them and can never lead them." Yes, he replied, we certainly have. That's a very important point. If the soul or consciousness, or I don't know what you want to call it in other ways, is merely something that is a result of our organism, our physical being, then it could never be anything, it could never oppose that it would always be just what it was because of the way the body was. But he's pointed out that the body's desires can be opposed by the soul. That just because we're thirsty doesn't mean we will go and have a drink. Just because we're hungry, it doesn't mean we will eat. That the soul has the capacity to say no to the body, to assert itself against the body, which indicates that the soul is not merely an effect of the body, but has its own independent being. So he says, "Well now, do we not find the soul acting in just the opposite way and leading all the elements of which she is said to consist, and opposing them in almost everything all through life, and lording it over them in every way, and chastising them, sometimes severely and with a painful discipline, such as gymnastic and medicine, and sometimes lightly, sometimes threatening and sometimes admonishing the desires and passions and fears, as though she were speaking to something other than herself?" That's pretty interesting. And if we interpret the thing generously, pretty in itself formidable. That according to the simius harmony thesis of the relation between body and soul, the state of the soul would always be a reflection of the state of the body. But in our common experience, we find that this is not so. That soul or consciousness or will has the capacity to act independently, and that would seem, at least, to suggest that there is the possibility of an independence of soul from body. It doesn't, in itself, of course, prove that soul continues to exist after the death of the body, but it at least gives some response to the idea that soul is utterly dependent on body, and gives some window for the idea that the soul can exist independently from body.